Hello and welcome to another episode of Beam There Done That, again with my glorious co-host Francesco Cesarini.
Hi there, everyone. I'm Francesco Cesarini. Also co-host and jack of all trades. And every episode I pick a different title. Today I'll be picking the title of lecturer at Oxford University, as we'll be discussing a topic which is really kind of connected to this job I have, and it's a topic I've been looking for an answer for the last 6 months. In a world of senior developers, and we reached a point where a senior developer in a week, produces what a team of developers used to take 3 months to produce 18 months ago. How does a career path for a graduate or a mid-level engineer look like? And speaking to industry experts, I've understood that you need a senior to manage what AI has produced. And at the same time, however, AI has taken over the jobs of junior and mid-level engineers and does everything they used to do, and does it much faster and without doing as many mistakes as a graduate used to do. So removing the practical experience, which allowed the career progression and allowed graduates and juniors to become seniors. How's that going to look like in the future? How are we going to make sure that when all the seniors retire, and it's more than if it's when it's going to happen, it's how do you make sure that we've got people to replace them? And with us today, and actually sitting in the same room as me, I'll turn off the camera. See, Bruce, wave. Hey, we've got Bruce Tate, which author of 7 languages in 7 weeks, co-author of 10+ books in Elixir, and founder of Groxio. And I think I'll introduce Bruce by sharing a story. I was a plane to London from a small local airport in Italy, Perugia Airport. And when I fly, I'm usually the one earphones in. I've got my 50 Shades of Grey, which I'm reading. I'm not reading it. I'm pretending to read it, just not to have to speak to anyone. But on this rare occasion, I started speaking after we'd landed to the person next to me and found out that he was an entrepreneur and software developer from Siena in Tuscany, traveling to London. And we started speaking late, but on the jetway, I mentioned that I work with Erlang. And to my surprise, another passenger right behind us goes, 7 languages in 7 weeks. Turn around, look at him, and just responds, oh, the mythical Bruce Tate. He's coming to dinner at my place next week. And, asked, what this person did. And, oh, I'm a student. So I stopped and I kind of invited him to, come to, and I invited him to apply as a volunteer to the conference we were running, where Bruce was also speaking. So he actually applied. It was Code Mesh, and they came and they actually met. So, Bruce, I don't know if you remember meeting the student at Code Mesh when one of the many times you were there, but it's great to have you on the show, and it's actually great to be in the same room as you. I've spoken enough now. Why don't you go in and introduce yourself and maybe add anything I might have missed?
Yeah, where do I start? First, thank you for inviting me here, both Alan and Francesco. Also, Francesco, thank you for dinner last night. For those of you who don't know, Francesco is an amazing cook, and Francesco has been my kind of port in a port in a storm. Because as I travel through Europe, Francesco has always been the place to invite me to conferences and parties around and things like that. So thank you. Yeah, this is a topic that's really interesting to me because I've been running a mentoring organization for the last 10 years. And I shut it down just 3 weeks ago because the career path for junior developers was so unclear. So we had we formed this company called Groxio. We teach Elixir. And we've had a model where we try to fold in people who are underrepresented in technology, and we don't really define what that is. We let the people who kind of feel a need for more connection, more context, find us and plug in. And we would do professional trainings with about 4 people. And we would fold in another 2 or 3 people who were underrepresented, and then they came out with the same connections. And it kind of worked for everybody because it made the community kind of bigger, richer. It let us fold in people from other languages. But with the way that AI has been moving, it's been harder and harder for juniors to find jobs. So thank you for the opportunity for me to speak about this. And I'm really excited to see where today's conversation goes.
the dashboards are green, the PRs are coming in, code's churning out maybe faster than ever, right? Life seems good with the age of AI. But what does that really mean? Is that actually really the truth? I mean, the signs seem to be going that things are going well, other than, the massive layoffs that we have because of AI. Are we actually turning out, better code? Are we actually turning out better developers? Are juniors actually getting the proper, like the hand holding, the support that they need to grow as a developer? What do you think?
So I've been thinking a lot about this question, and this is a difficult time in the history of our industry, but it's not uniquely different. So what's happening is that really for the first time, a junior can develop more code without the limits of how do I manage my tool chain? How quickly can I type? How quickly can I remember what enumerable does? And so this is a problem because the walls of code that juniors can produce by overseeing their own agents, their own basically mini employees, is kind of swallowing our intermediates and the seniors in our organizations, because as reviews and pull requests come in, they don't have the background. They haven't been trained to prompt. They haven't been trained to quickly recognize when things are going wrong, when the occasional mistakes are made. They haven't learned to recognize the architectural signs that trouble is starting. And we basically have dropped the ball in developing our juniors with this whole new tool system. And so I have talked to probably 30 or 40 people in engineering leadership in the last, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 months. And the answers are always the same. It's for the people who are still trying to make junior developers work and invest in them in their organizations are all having this problem. Every single one of them. That there's more code, more volume than their seniors can effectively manage. And the seniors also haven't been trained to basically say, hey, this code is cheap now. What's expensive is folding in the mistakes. So they haven't been trained to say no in the right way, in constructive ways, and kind of the old mentoring tracks that we had. That's basically, we're going to take the pull request, for example, as a learning moment and offer instruction during that time. That whole focused review system is different and gone.
But I mean, AI can't be all that, bad. I mean, I kind of painted a little bit of a negative picture over here. There has to be something really, really great that AI, brings to both new developers and existing senior level developers. But of course, we've talked about some of the negatives, but I'm kind of curious about what negatives have you personally had using AI?
Yeah, so there are always pluses and minuses, right? And even for a junior, this should be a magical time when I could learn much more quickly. So, for example, I worked with this junior in our mentoring program. One of the things that we do is we've kind of put aside the traditional courses to develop this next generation of programmers, because that's something that Groxio really believes in. But as part of this mentoring program, we were able to make progress with an engineer to really get the core concepts in Elixir. And here I'm talking about the inversion of control, the behaviors, the live views, the OTPs, the gen stage, the architectural things that it used to take engineers like 6 months, a year, 2 years to roll into. And he's been quite productive with them, right? So I'm not saying that AI is negative. I'm saying that at some point, as this transition is being made, we stopped investing in engineers. And I think that's kind of the damage that's the biggest thing I'm afraid of right now, is that, and I think that this is universal, that we're concerned about the junior generation and how juniors become seniors. And how do we build that pathway? And I think it's really not really that different than what things were before, except for the pace and the volume, right? So I would say that AI is overwhelming some of the checks and balances that we've had in place in the development of what kind of has served as our traditional mentoring and apprenticeship paths in the industry. That's probably the biggest thing I'm concerned about right now. Though there are a lot of them.
Paint me three scenes, so not concepts, but actual scenes. We've got the junior at their desk. So the junior's been told that, they're 10x more productive now, and they genuinely believe it. The senior at the desk. So the senior is actually drowning in pull requests, which have to be reviewed, and hasn't quite named or possibly even realized that they're tired or on the verge of a burnout. And a manager, on an engineering manager on the one-on-one, the engineering manager who's looking at the green dashboard and feels that everything is fine. It's same day. It's pretend it's a Tuesday afternoon. Same team, AI augmented workflow. What is actually happening, which in each of these three places, in each of these three roles, and in the minds of these people?
So that's a timely question. I actually have a LinkedIn article series coming out, starting to come out next week, and it talks about exactly this. And let's put three names on people. So the junior we're going to call Freddie, and Freddie has come out of university in the last 6 months, and is kind of the shining star of an organization. And Freddie's afraid, because she believes that the successes that she has will be, she's probably right, that people will say that's AI that's having these successes. And the failures that she has, she doesn't quite understand, because our old training methods have taught us to teach the basics of a language first and not the architectural elements. And so Freddie's afraid. She's productive. She's not progressing in the most important parts of her craft. And that's how to kind of edit herself within how much of a pull request that she should take on. Because really, traditionally, she's been limited in the amount of code that she could technically create. I mean, she's been limited by her memory, by her tool chain, by her effectiveness in the tools, by her experience in the system. And so these limits have in some ways served us well. So Freddie is afraid for her job, rightfully so, because we're firing juniors hand over fist. And Freddie is not progressing like she needs to in the most important parts of her craft. How does she decide how much to put on her plate? How does she recognize quickly with red-green indicators that this code is good or this is breaking? And really, how does she fit into this next engineering organization? Because the path has been disappearing for her. And she's watched this happen to her peers in her organization. And the senior, let's call Senior Martin. This is kind of where the opening scene for my LinkedIn article series will be. The series is going to, the first article will be called The Sludge on the Wall. Because Martin is so high strung, he's been in this pull request, he's been drowning in this review, feeling inadequate because he's never been this far behind before. He's probably been an excellent engineer. He's probably not doing the things that we hired him to do. And that's kind of building the architecture of the system. The architecture is kind of being slapped together haphazardly by these many tiny little pull requests that Martin can't get on top of. And this is a big issue, right? Because Martin hasn't had the training of hey, this code is cheap, right? The code is very, very cheap. The expensive pieces happen after you merge in something that doesn't fit, right? So Martin is afraid. He's so afraid that he's in the coffee room, somebody drops a spoon, and then the coffee gets slung up and there's this sludge on the wall. And that's the kind of the central premise. But let's leave that stain up on the wall and talk about the management, because management is seeing a whole set of different indicators. They see green, green, green in lines of code, but they're measuring the wrong things. We're not measuring the cohesion. We're not measuring the development. We're assuming that Martin is making progress in his career. He's not. He's losing track. He's assuming that Freddie's making progress in her career. She's not making it nearly fast enough. She needs to be learning architectural issues. We're trying to teach her low-level Elixir, and we're hoping that the prompting is going to happen because aren't these agents great? And so all of these elements of the system are kind of looking at each other. The engineer's been, or the VP is afraid because probably the VP, she probably recognizes that there's going to be upward pressure to shrink her team and increase productivity. And just like Freddie, the management is saying, hey, if I'm productive, it's AI's win. And if I fail, it's AI that is, or if I'm productive, it's AI's win. And if I fail because of AI, it's my fault. And doesn't know what to do, doesn't know what to measure, doesn't know how to grow an organization anymore, doesn't know what the rules are.
What's striking about all those three scenes is that everyone would describe this Tuesday as a good day. Freddie shipped, and Martin cleared the pull request queue and approved all the pull requests, and the manager saw green. Bruce, what is each of them missing about what's happening in the other two scenes? What is it they're not actually seeing?
So different things in different places, right? So Freddie is in some ways guessing, pushes up a pull request, and where in some places, the Martins of the world have said, does it work? Does Creo pass? Do the test pass? Do my performance test pass? I'm going to put enough training wheels on the system. I'm going to put enough gauges, knobs, and levers that if it works, I'm going to call it good enough, and I'm just going to merge everything. And what's happening is now Freddie through AI, through all the Freddies who have ever lived, and the new Freddies driving the system, they're training the engines that are building the software. And every mistake that's ever made, we're going to speed run that into a product. We're going to call it a product and ship it. So for Freddie, the main thing is that she needs to be learning a whole new set of skills to progress in her craft. And the nice thing about it is, Alan, you asked earlier, what are the good things about AI? Well, one of the great things is that you have a coach and an instructor, and with a few extra prompts and that basically set Freddie's level that get loaded at the beginning of the scene. We could have coaches kind of folded in to help Freddie do her job, to help her say, hey, wait a minute, you might have taken on too much with this, because I've seen these are the types of pull requests that get away from you. So, hey, let's tamp this down a little bit. And so what Martin needs is he needs the freedom, and he needs he needs to develop the taste to recognize that this code is too much. And I'm going to say no, because the pull request doesn't tell me the story that I need to tell. And by the way, if none of you have seen Sasha Urich's talk, Tell Me a Story, read it, because he does this for juniors communicating with seniors in pull requests outside of AI. But it's so much more important now that our pull requests tell a story. And our management teams need to provide the most important thing they can do right now is decide that hey, we do have this dividend of productivity. Francesco mentioned at the opening of the call that I could do work in a week that used to take my organization 3 months. We can invest that dividend in our juniors. These are techniques that we can teach that really aren't that hard to learn. By looking over the shoulders of seniors, by taking a focused look that says, hey, these are the skills that we used to teach. They don't work anymore. These are the skills we need to be teaching because those skills are going to advance both the prompting and the architecture, and they're going to give Martin his control back.
Before we get into your approach, Bruce, can you give the listener 3 questions they can ask themselves on Monday morning, whether all of this is actually happening to their team? One for the junior, one for the senior, and one for the manager.
Yes, very good question. So Freddie should be asking herself, how am I moving forward in my craft? And the craft is not necessarily writing Elixir, writing Erlang. Maybe the craft is the prompts that helped to write the Elixir in Erlang. It's putting eyes on the right code in the right layers in the right places. How am I advancing my craft to take some of the load off of Martin? How am I helping in that process? Because Freddie needs to learn to self-edit, and this is going to drive everything else that she does. It's a problem that we haven't had in history until now because the tools are so good at creating volume of the wrong thing. So what Martin needs to be asking himself is, what is a kind way to say no? This code is going to make it more difficult for all of us to maintain and carry forward the system as we've designed it. I need to claim back control of kind of artistic control of this project and the organization and architecture standards and the security standards and the prompt design. So how can I say no is how can I best say no in a way that advances my juniors and advances my organization? And the leadership should be asking, how do I invest? How do I invest in my future? How do I stop eating my seed corn? And so how do I basically measure the right things? And I don't know what the measurements are yet, but how do I measure the right things so that Freddie can tell me when she's feeling overwhelmed and when she's feeling particularly productive and in sync? How does Martin tell me that, hey, this is getting away from me? I need to take some time to reshape these interfaces to clean up the architecture of my system.
Okay, Bruce, let's say that, the team has asked themselves this question. They realize that, okay, there's definitely a problem over here. We need to solve this. What is there like a framework that we can use or that they could use to actually pull themselves out of the situation and start to get on the right track?
I think that I'd like to say that there's a silver bullet. I think that once we have a silver bullet, the tools will have moved. So basically, I think the silver bullet is making the decision to invest and having the organizations buy in to that decision to invest. So there are a couple of things that we can train. So for Freddie, a big thing that we can teach is how to take on the right size task, how to prompt in such a way that you maintain the discipline and the layering that Martin's looking for. And what are the red-green indicators that let me know if this particular code chunk is on the right track? But that means that we have to do parallel training in Elixir, right? So I used to teach, hey, these are the data structures that you need in Elixir. We're going to start from that. We're going to build functions around that. And we're going to layer on to the boundary layers. That's not what I do now. Now I'm basically saying these are the main architectural layers of the system. This is how to tell when the layerings are intact, right? So for example, we teach in Elixir pipes in the core, widths in the boundary, because widths allow me to compose through failure. So if I'm seeing a lot of these tag tuples in the functional core, that's in the wrong place in the architecture, which is going to complicate the designs exponentially. I don't want that. Yeah, so there are systems. There are small systems that the tools will get better and better at using. And I have an inkling that if Francesco has been doing his due diligence and pulling the system out of Groxio's materials, one of the things we're going to find is that those systems don't work anymore. And we'll talk about why. And that's going to be a good conversation as well. But yeah, there's not a system. The system now is the decision to make the investment. And the organizations who choose to invest in their juniors will do well and will help us survive without eating our seed corn, which is our juniors. That's how you have a career path out of this, any career path.
Now, if we're actually using an agent to help us to write code, right, is there anything specific within the Beam itself, like within the Beam languages, that can help us to make sure that when we're writing a gen server, that we're actually having a proper return tuple coming back? Because it's not, the Beam, most Beam languages are not like, say, Rust, where you actually have a compile time checking, right? We're working on that in Elixir. But are agents actually able to handle this so that way we can actually relax a bit more and know that we're actually getting something that's more proper and some better code for these kinds of callbacks, and we're not just like having an agent just kind of hallucinating an answer that it says it thinks it is correct.
Actually, I think that the Beam might be the best language for AI at all. Period. So Dashbit, for those of you who don't know, Dashbit is the organization that employs Jose Vellum, and Jose is the creator of Elixir. Jose posted an article that Elixir was found to be the most accurate language for AI, and I believe this is true because of the there's kind of this evolving gradual based typing, which is really nice for both humans and agents to review. There's kind of a uniformity of structure of documentation and of tooling, and there's Tidewave, and Tidewave has built in a lot of these ideas. But if you're asking what's the secret sauce in the agents, well, it kind of moves over the time. In Groxio, our most popular courses right now, or our most popular teaching topics are, what do you do with live view components? Because in live view, it's relatively easy to replicate a stateful language architecture with components on a web page. And so we teach methods to kind of step away from those designs and pull the agents back when they go in that direction. But I mentioned a couple of other right green indicators, like you can prompt for these things. So you can teach a junior, hey, build a counter, show the agent how the counter code is structured. Say, this is the pattern that I want to follow when you're building functional core imperative shell, which is a great model that takes AI in a lot of good design directions. You have the Ash framework, which is a way to basically build a domain model, which there's all kinds of rich information all across the training data. These domain specific models can be used to derive your code, right? So it's model your domain, derive the rest, and that works very well with AI systems. It's almost a cheat code. So these are some of the things that I talk to organizations about. And to when I'm at a conference, these are the things I'm talking to the creators of the frameworks, all of these people about.
So we've had quite a few framework creators, but we've also had an episode with Jose Valin where we discussed exactly these topics you mentioned. Bruce, I recommend you actually subscribe to our podcast. You can do it on YouTube, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, and you also catch in on the episode we recorded with Jose, because we cover exactly this. So going to this leads us into mini tasks, and mini tasks, the smaller tasks is where I expect the Beam to shine. Small functions, clear data, explicit transformations, all encapsulated in immutable processes, placed in a supervision tree and packaged into a kind of semi-standalone application. But what happens when these mini tasks go in and cross process boundaries? Write me a handle call for this, or the agent still doesn't know about the supervision strategy and what a supervision strategy is, and doesn't start thinking about your timeout semantics, whether your behavior should be a gen server or a finite state machine. Where does this kind of mini task go in and break down?
And that's a training question, right? It's a training question for the agents, and it's a training question for our junior engineers. And so what the last probably 5 or 6 months have shown us is that our training systems are breaking, and we need to reimagine them. And what that means is, so Francesco, you laid it out perfectly. What we need is tooling that has better types and metatypes. And by metatypes, I mean, kind of the architecture, the behavior behind the gen server, so that it can apply more generalized patterns. We need better intermediate and advanced engineering kind of built into the people right out of college, right? We used to drill people on the core, functional core of a language first. You can't do that anymore. We basically have to at least build in the idea of a smoke test. Here are the things that you have to be concerned about. So it used to be I could talk to an Elixir engineer And we wouldn't open application.ex until probably like the seventh or eighth day of the training. And now that's probably the second day. Those concepts, the supervision strategy has to move up, because when you don't, bad things happen. And we also need better tooling, and tooling that's more specific to the language, and that's Sidewave. So I think that Elixir is extraordinarily well positioned. We just need to make some decisions as an industry to invest in our juniors, and to invest in training for our juniors. And it's really critical. That's what Groxio is dedicating ourselves now, is to building a future for our engineers.
Thanks for this, Bruce. I have a similar anecdote. I think it's really, really important that we teach the theory. It's not We teach the why things are done in a particular way, and that the juniors and the students really go in and understand it. Because if they don't understand the why, the how and the what, comes second, especially if there's someone else doing that. And an example, I mean, I'll be heading up back to Oxford to teach now in a couple of months, but the students there were using auto completion to go in and implement recursive call exercises. And so, yeah, guess what? They got their exercises done very, very quickly. They were all correct, but the cost came later because they failed to understand the patterns, and they didn't understand the recursive patterns. And by not understanding the recursive patterns, they then had problems when we then moved on to higher order functions, where you start compressing all of your recursive patterns into a function call and put the code where you change the state into a fun. And that was very, very clear. So, I found myself asking, don't use autocompletion, don't use AI, try to do this on your own, because that's where it then clicks. And don't forget, you're here not to learn, but you're here to learn how to learn. And if you let AI do everything for you, you won't be learning the fundamentals, which will then allow you to check, what your coding agents are doing.
That makes a lot of sense. There are times in the training process when we need the agents to kind of accelerate, basically to break some of the friction. And there are times when we have to turn them off. And a great example is recursion. Another one is kind of using your tools to navigate. Elixir is an explicit language, and so you're not going to have a macro introduction without it being explicitly in the code base somewhere. And the ability to kind of quickly drill down into that code base is a super important skill. And it's not something that you could just ask the agent to do. But you can ask the agent, hey, help me find this definition. Help me explore this and point me to the, for example, where is the live view behavior actually called when I say use Phoenix Live View? Well, the agent can show you that exact definition and exactly how it got there. And that basically gives you both, Francesco. It helps us accelerate kind of the learning path. It gives the user, our students, confidence to turn the agents on, but also to turn them off. They can learn more quickly that way. So this is kind of like the hybrid approach that we should.
When I'm actually using like an AI agent, right, I'm pretty comfortable with kind of giving it some logic and seeing where maybe there's some parts that I missed on. I can believe that. But when you have a very complicated system where all these things are running concurrently, therefore possibly could be running even, I forgot the word now, but running at the same time. I'm parallel. Can I actually trust the agent to be able to figure out like logic error? Like let's say we have like the two general issue where you're expecting this act from different sides and it's possible, it could get lost. Is it actually able to solve these kinds of difficult problems? Because even humans struggle with this kind of thing, and we're the ones that actually have solutions for this kind of stuff.
If I answer the question no, 2 months, the answer is going to be different. So actually, we are using agents to debug things that humans can't now. But yeah, I mean, Alan, you're saying we still need seniors, which is a great world to live in, right? And we still need to build seniors, which is a great world for our juniors and intermediates to live in. So yeah, I completely agree. This is moving more quickly than I could ever have guessed.
Let's talk about collaboration. Bruce, kind of the collaboration mode you're describing, is very much around you. You remain in the architect. The AI becomes a high throughput assistant. That requires a human, to already be an architect. which is the whole problem we started out with the episode with. How does a junior who's not yet an architect use this mode without it secretly becoming mode 5, which, spoiler alert, is actually vibing?
Right, right. So there are a number of things, a number of techniques that we choose. The first is a technique of describing a general problem by coding a general problem by hand. I can't count the number of times that I've built a key value store and wrapped it in a gen server and say, use this pattern. And I want to say, and notice these things about the pattern. Notice that I have pipes in the core, widths in the boundary. Clean return codes, certainty embraced in the core, tag tuples in the boundary. And so then I could say, hey, Claude, generalize this model, and this is what I want you to use for your gen servers. And notice these things that we have prefer cast to call and all of these things. And so one of the things that a junior can be doing is building simple systems that have the interfaces that they like, and say, generalize this model and plug that into your AI layered prompt architecture. And that works extremely well because it's something that the junior can really help and do quickly. So from a senior standpoint, the skills are a little bit different. So from a senior standpoint, this looks a little different. What our seniors are looking for is kind of how do you use this? How do you organize a team that looks of developers who understand these individual approaches? So I mean, still there's no silver bullet, but we're actually we're saying, hey, we're looking ahead. We're seeing the types of prompts that are breaking. When the prompts go wrong, we're throwing them away. We're throwing away the result, and we're prompting better. And we're prompting with techniques of simple problems that we don't understand, of simple problems that we understand, that we could say, hey, apply these patterns elsewhere within the system. That's generally what we do.
I started to kind of put more trust into agents recently. I started actually kind of, vibing some solutions to some clients, right? Is vibing itself evil in itself? Or, can I actually be safe in that way that, okay, I can just, vibe out something and let it kind of see how it goes? Because we all know that, like, prototypes, right? You ship a prototype to a client, to a manager, whatever. They usually end up being production system. Like, can I actually feel safe if I actually vibe out a product using AI agents? Or, should I really be a little bit more diligent and maybe be a bit more hands-on than just, letting the agent do its thing?
That's judgment, right? It's we're going to code chunks larger and larger. Many of the chunks that we code in this way are going to sneak into production. Actually, even be intentionally pushed into production. But the question is, how do we get the right answers out of the machine the first time? When you can get the right answer the first time, you say, great, hey, is that vibing? I don't know. And when you don't, you throw it away, you prompt better, and you try again. But that's not the flow that Freddie is practicing now, right? So Freddie is saying, hey, I'm asking for something. I'm getting mostly what I wanted. And then I'm breaking the world. I'm breaking everything by layering on a couple of prompts to fix what I got. So yeah, Alan, that's judgment, right? That's what we aspire to be able to get the right code the first time, and we're all kind of moving in that direction.
Bruce, looking at those 5 modes together, so they're completion, mini tasks, debugging, collaboration, and vibing. If I'm a junior who wants to become a senior in 2026, which of these modes do I live in, and which ones do I avoid? Because I have a hunch, that the answer isn't that obvious.
So these are the modes that we used to talk about because it was basically at the limits of the tools, right? But still, I think that as a developer, we need to have a toolbox. There are times that I need to even, I would say that I probably write about 10% of the code that I used to. And I probably write about 80% of what I do is driven from the prompt. So that's a pretty big percentage of everything that I write. And I would consider myself an expert. So I would say that you're trying to get more leverage out of your tools without compromising your quality. That's what we're after. Some of the time, that's going to be, hey, agent, I don't like where you're going. So what I'm going to do is what I call completion-based prompting, right? Which is kind of open a new file in my def module and then start some comments that are going to drive my design until AI starts picking up what I'm putting down. Once it does, then I'm trying to move down the food chain, and then I get better at following the prompts. I get better at putting the guardrails up in the right place. I get better at capturing Martin's vision for our software system with all kind of the error propagation, the supervision strategies, that everything is still in line with what Martin wants. And I move down the food chain, and I aspire to get perfect code when I write my prompts. And is that vibing? I don't know. I think that sounds more like software engineering to me.
I'm a junior, right? And I'm about 2 years into my career. I've been using Claude to kind of ship these features, ship them fast, ship them pretty well. But I'm hearing that the mode that I'm in right now, that when I'm coding, it's not at the senior level that I need to actually strive for, right? So it's a new week, Monday morning. I start my job. How should I start to shift myself so that way I could start being more of a senior rather than just being a junior that's able to kind of prompt my code properly or prompt my agents properly?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that there are 4 main steps. The first is you have to get very good at throwing code away, right? And it's a mindset. Once you throw away your first chunk of code, you should celebrate. It's not something to cry about. A lot of what you should be building in order to throw code away is kind of the meta prompting, so that I can start clean with a new Git branch, because the single source of truth is a repository in the cloud. With the agent itself, the memory, I have to be able to wipe it clean. That's the most important part, because this is this conveyor belt of words with the that's dropping eventually instructions off the end, and that's what's going to make the system hallucinate. So the first skill is to be able to throw things away. You need to internalize that, and when you throw something away, you have to be able to prompt better the next time. The second thing that I would say is be able to understand everything that you ship. And if you don't understand it all, then you need to be taking on smaller chunks. You need to be cutting up your pull request into smaller pieces. And you need to be able to use Claude to help you understand things that you couldn't before. The third thing that you need to be able to do is focus on what your senior leadership needs. Sometimes my senior leaders, as I've been working on programming teams, or as I've been coaching people working on programming teams, they're underwater and they know it and they can express why, and they're asking for the same thing over and over and they're not getting it, right? And that's a prompting question, right? And so you need to be able to take the senior's advice, build it into constructive feedback that you can plug into your prompting tree. And by the prompting tree, I mean everything that you feed into your agents.md, and everything that weaves out, everything that we anchor to that agents.md. And the fourth thing that you have to do is take your time, finish your work. And that's a step that we haven't all been doing. Some of that goes to our senior leadership. What are we asking our juniors to do? And some of that is frankly, don't ship something that is making you guess, right? And those are the 4 things. Throw it away, better layered prompt designs. I don't even remember the third one. And the fourth one is to plug into what your seniors want.
I really like the idea about being able to get comfortable throwing away code. I feel like there's a lot of people who are not, doing that enough. And I also like your idea of the, actually understanding what people, are giving you, because so many times, at least definitely at the beginning of kind of when people start using AI agents to help them code, there's always this, there's this code in here. I'm reading it as a senior dev. I don't know what it's doing, or what it's doing is kind of strange. Can you help me understand? And it's funny how many times, at least at the beginning of this AI, kind of push was, I don't know, the agent did it, and I just, the test passed, and that's it. Like, and they thought, and they, I it almost feels like they think this is a valid, reason. When in reality, it's like, well, no, because we don't know what this thing is doing. It could be opening a huge hole for somebody to get into, or it could be opening for many other bugs, right? So those actually two combined are actually really good. The fact that if you don't know what it is, probably should throw it away, and if if you can't understand what it's doing, but it could actually be wrong. So definitely be happy to, or not happy, but be open to letting it go. Now coming back to my question, for the code that AI produces, do you ever find anything that AI is actually having particular problems with, like such as gen servers, or going back to the philosophy of letting it crash? Like, is it adding in too much, what do you call that? Like safe coding into it? Do you see any kinds of things that happen over and over again with agents?
Absolutely. And one thing that's interesting is I moved from the Cloud Code user interface, which I really like, to Tidewave because it doesn't make some of these same repeated mistakes. So one of the main ones for me, I would say that there are two main ones for me. One is kind of the idea of understanding the with flow. And with we teach as composition through failure. It's the pipe that allows me to fail. So the whole idea of where widths go in the architecture, that is a boundary layer concern, right? That is a context concern if you're a Phoenix programmer. But that's in the gen server layer, the API layer. And then the whole idea of where you should start to see tag tuple show up, right? So a tag tuple is nothing but a wrapping strategy, nothing different than a chain set. But it essentially allows me to encapsulate the idea of failure, which shouldn't be a concept that I'm really concerned about in my functional core. My functional core should embrace composition through certainty without failure, right? So I see that miss all the time, right? And that's something that you can prompt for. It's something I do prompt for. I typically build a counter and say, hey, there's no tag tuples in the counter. We validate outside of the functional core layer because those are issues that I need to be capturing in the boundary. The second one is Phoenix live components. Live components are kind of, they allow you to encapsulate and share state, which is a design node. In a lot of the earlier books, training materials, including mine, use live components. And so there's more bad Phoenix code out there in the wild than there is good. And when you have those kinds of problems, you need to prompt for that. And so we do. We teach techniques for layering the live components. So once I've captured the patterns with a simple architecture that can be recognized and triggered with a verbal trigger, I can prevent those problems.
That's a junior, but the senior listening in with 40 pull requests they have to review. They'll say this is great in theory, but who's actually going to teach the junior all of this? When I don't have the time. So let's go there next. I taught my first course in 1998, and the things which I keep coming back to is the moment a junior becomes a senior is the actual moment where they stop asking, "Does this work?" and they instead start asking, "What happens when this fails?" And I remember that course very vividly. I was in Research Triangle Park in the US for 3 weeks. I taught the basics. I spent a week mentoring everyone to get them to start thinking in terms of fault tolerance, reliability, scalability, and then I spent a week, teaching them OTP. And so when does what does it take when what does it take to get a junior to start thinking over what happens when this fails? This is not a question AI prompts that well, and they need to start asking the right questions when the coding agents keeps on showing them the happy path. What is your view and what is your approach to this?
Wow. So, say, Bruce, how do you teach an agent what we haven't figured out how to teach people to do? I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, this is why we need seniors and why judgment is important and why we can imagine a place in the workplace for seniors but we lack imagination for juniors, right? Because agents can do most of what juniors can, the way we teach them, right? But we need to kind of start reframing what we teach, like how juniors become seniors, right? Part of that is we need to be better at teaching the core architectural and layering techniques, the core failure modes, error propagation earlier in our system. And AI is going to give us that dividend and that opportunity, right? It will. It will. And it might mean that that we're leaving some holes in the development of our juniors that we're not comfortable with. But it's a different set of tools and it's a different world. And we need to accelerate the architectural paths. And this is everywhere that inversion of control shows up, specifically protocols, behaviors, macros, all those places. Our juniors need to understand how they work. They need to understand how they break. They need to understand how their code fits in the overall ecosystem that they're trying to build.
The senior, from what I'm hearing, is changing not only what they teach, but also what they have to review. And the seniors themselves can't fix this alone. Leadership is still measuring, PR velocity and treating green dashboards as a success. The seniors just swimming upstream. So let's go in and talk, to the engineering manager and the CTO. So, Bruce, what's the hardest conversation here? I mean, the hardest conversation here is the one with leadership, and it's because the dashboards keep on saying everything is fine, everything is great. If I'm the VP of engineering listening to this, my CFO is going to ask me why I'm slowing down something that looks like it's working. What do I go in and tell them?
Let's go back to the senior for just a second. So the most important skill for that senior is saying no, and saying no in a way that advances the craft of the juniors, right? So this pull request isn't up to snuff. I don't understand it, so no, you don't. This is a do-over. Here are the 3 places that I've seen why. Once I got to 3, I quit counting. It's too much of my time, and I'm not going to finish your job. We need to learn how to say that in a way that's compassionate and that helps our juniors grow, right? So for our leadership team, that is the difficult conversation because we're asking for part of that dividend that AI is providing. Make that dividend. You're getting all of this productivity. You need to invest some of it back, or we as an industry don't have a future. And it's really that simple. You have to invest in the next generation. And you can't rely on everyone else to invest in open source programming languages. You have to make that investment. You can't rely on everyone else to build your juniors for you into seniors. You have to make that investment. Because if we all decide not to make that investment, then we're eating our seed core and we are destroying our future.
What I'm noticing is that, all 3 of these groups are they all can have an issue. They cannot fix this all on their own, right? So the junior can change their practice, but still be undermined by the leadership's metrics. The senior can change their review style, but can still be drowning if the org doesn't help support them and help them to have the proper tools to quickly, but also yet efficiently go through all the different reviews that they need to do. And, the leadership, they have to figure out what's the right metrics, right? I don't think there's ever been a way that leadership can have proper metrics. I mean, lines of code is definitely not going to be able to cut any kind of metric, but it's hard to measure, output from a dev team having, the proper way. But, coming back to this, right? Even if the leadership does change their metrics and, there's still nothing being produced properly by juniors and so forth, is there any way to solve this? I mean, you mentioned before about silver bullet, but is there really any truly silver bullet that could solve all of these kinds of issues?
Well, I hope not, because I bet that AI would learn how to do it. If there's a silver bullet, then we don't have a job, right? Yeah, these are hard problems. So what I'm after with today's conversation is the recognition that juniors are worth investing in. It's incredibly important, and really we have the money, right? We have this dividend, and so let me paint a picture of what it could be, of how life could be. So Martin Martin starts the process by saying, hey, I'm drowning. I'm admitting I'm drowning. It's not because I am failing at the job that you brought me on to do. It's that I don't get to do that job anymore. And so the way that I know to get my head over water is to say no and reject the pull requests that aren't ready. And here's what I'm going to do. Here's why I'm going to do it. And here's what I want you to do, juniors, in response. Kick it over to Freddie. So Freddie, the junior. So Freddie says, okay, I hear what Martin is saying. Martin, I need training to make this happen. And so Martin says, hey, I can't train you. We're going to go outside, or I'm going to make time on my senior staff. We're going to slow down and we're going to spend some of this productivity dividend on our juniors. Right. And so once Freddie starts, and then the senior leadership has to make, or the project, the management, and has to make a decision, has to decide to make this investment, whether it's in time or external training and services, to get help for the juniors, get help for the seniors, so that Martin can start shaping the system again. And Freddie's day looks very different now. Freddie now, instead of taking on this giant chunk, vibing it out quickly, recognizing that she doesn't understand what's created, patch it up with whatever tests that she can make work, mark all the fragile tests that she's made fragile that she doesn't quite understand, and throws that code away and says, no, that's too much. What I need is this small piece that I understand. I need to build this pure functional core. And then there are functions in there, constructors, reducers. I understand how they work because I built a counter with my trainer. And then I can ask, hey, build a simple service that looks like this counter. Use those patterns with this layered approach. And then Freddie is taking on smaller steps effectively, and she's finishing her work by asking Martin what Martin needs at every stage. And so it's really almost like we're asking Freddie to do more planning work than we did before. And it's okay because she has more help than she had before. And then we're asking Martin to say no and do more of the work that we brought you on to do. And to basically do this in a compassionate way that allows for the growth of the juniors. And we're asking our management to make a commitment in this process. Things will take longer. It's going to be more expensive. But that's okay because you have seen this tremendous, you've seen all this green on the dashboard. Now we want to do this in a way where the dashboard's not lying to you, right? We're going to finish our work as we go.
We've named the disease. We've walked through the framework. We've heard, what it looks like in the wild, and we've even stress tested whether this is real. Now, to our kind of closing notes, to the last segment, what will the listener actually be able to, do about this on Monday morning? So you promised us tangible. Let's get tangible.
If you're management, invest in your future. That's it. That's our pledge. That's the one thing that you can do. You could take part of your dividend. You can invest it by listening to your seniors and what they need and how Martin can say no in such a way. And he's going to make some lights flash red on the dashboard for a little while. That's okay. That's healthy. That's expected. For Freddie, we're asking Freddie to ask for the help that she needs. To say, I am shipping a lot of code. I'm not getting better at the code that I'm going to ship. And I'm not going to be advancing at the rate that your juniors typically do because I'm not writing the code anymore. And I don't understand what I'm creating, right? So Freddie is going to ask for the training, the mentoring, whatever Freddie needs to ramp up with the prompting tools. How do you layer prompts? How do you recognize that things are off track? How do you get them back on track by throwing away code, anchoring your agents.markdown to prompting advice in the system that's changeable and triggerable, right? And Martin, we're going to start this with Martin's drowning. We're going to say, hey, I'm going to give you freedom to say no. I know you're going to break my dashboard. I know we're going to slow down, and that's okay. We need to slow down because we need to make an investment in our future. So 3 tangible promises. Our management promises to invest in our future. Our senior promises to say no if the work's not complete. And our juniors promise to accept the training that they're given, to get better at their craft, and promises to finish her work as she goes. That's it.
I want to talk a little bit more about the management part, right? So because the leadership part, because obviously those are the ones that actually, you know, they sign the checks at the end of the day, right? They need to actually have some kind of input, right? Yeah, you're telling them to okay, you're going to see some red dots or red bars, however kind of, you're going to see some stuff happening. It's not going to be good, but be aware that it's going to be better. Now, what should they actually be looking for, right? Because in the end, like I said, they sign the checks, right? It's always an end game of input, output. Okay, input this time will be some of those, red bars, some bad things are going to happen. But what's going to be the output? How long should they actually wait? I think we need to talk a little bit more about the management side, because that one is the most tricky one, I think, because that one is going to be something that, like you said, investing over time. This is also an investment too, right? Investing in the fact that we're going to have some troubles now for some long-term solutions later. Can you delve a little bit more on that one?
Yeah, that's always a hard one, right? It is tricky for the management too, because it's hard to be the one that says, hey, we're accumulating some technical debt under my watch, right? We're asking the manager to say that we've accumulated some technical debt under my watch. What's happening is that we're increasing the surface area of our code, right? Maybe one of the things that we should be measuring is the health of our API structures. Maybe something that we should be measuring is how much code that we're throwing away. Maybe we should be measuring how much code that we are throwing away that was actually committed by agents that's done in the wrong way. But basically, what we're saying is that we're accumulating surface area that is not healthy, and it is not aligned with the system that we built in the first place. This happened because as the agents got more productive, we were able to write code more quickly than we could review it in good conscience. And we can't keep doing business in this way, or we're going to drown our organization and we're going to eat our future. How do you measure that? I don't know. If I knew that, I'd be a wealthy man. My suggestions are try to measure the complexity of the code base, try to measure the health of the APIs, try to measure total surface area, lines of code as a negative metric, maybe, instead of a positive one, right? How quickly is my code base growing? I don't know. Those are some rough ideas. I know that's not satisfying. I don't have a silver bullet here. I don't have an answer. I just want to raise the flag that it's one that our industry desperately needs to solve.
The dashboards are green. The PR counts are up. Why are seniors quietly burning out? If a listener takes nothing else from this conversation, what's the one thing you want them to do differently just because they listened?
I would like people to understand that investing in juniors can be rewarding and it can help an organization grow. And that this is an investment that we owe our craft. So I would like us all to make this pledge together that we're going to invest in our juniors. And we're going to do that in such a way that we are going to allow a smaller, steadier pace of completed work in such a way that our juniors continue to advance. That's it.
Now, if this episode hit on something that you've been seeing in your own team, why don't you go ahead and tell us about it? We're going to do a follow-up episode in a couple of months to kind of, catch up on what's been happening. And we would love to hear back from listeners so we have more context on what the current situation is out there. The whole point of this kind of disease isn't that, is that if it doesn't get fixed, it could just grow into a much worse issue. And we'd love to hear from you. And feel free to find us out on LinkedIn. We're always available on Twitter or X and so forth. So I'm sure you can easily find us in any way that you could try to find us.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. So I've been writing Erlang since 1995 and being paid to do that. Every decade I've seen has brought on new tools that promises, new tools of promises to make engineers obsolete. And every year, this gets taken with skepticism. And the engineers who survives, I've noticed, are the ones who always stay curious and on top of what's happening around them. And they've gone in, and engineering managers who are the most successful ones are the ones who've gone in and actually built their teams the way they would build a supervision tree. They go in, they isolate failure, they will assume things will go wrong, and when things go wrong they make sure there's someone there to actually notice. The dashboards will always tell you something, and the question that's always mattered, and what matters now more than ever, is whether you still know what they're not telling you. And I think that's really what we need to be looking at moving forward. So thank you so much, Bruce, for being on the show. It was a pleasure to have you. And we really, really hope to have you back soon again, to record a follow-up on this and actually see where all of this is leading.
I will volunteer. We're in 3 different time zones. So I'm in the United States, Francesco's in Italy. And where are you, Alan?
I'm in Hong Kong for the moment.
So I will volunteer to eat the bad time zone to have the same call at this time next time around. So yes, and thank you, Francesco, for all your many kindnesses through the years, my friend. Any time for you.
I think we'll have to come to America. You'll have to come back to Europe. So yeah, thank you, Bruce, for being here. And just for the record, this episode was recorded May 18th, 2026.